Hey everyone, thanks for joining us for today's Learn Live. Set up an AI Center of Excellence. My name is Anna. I'm an event planner for Reactor, joining you from Redmond, Washington. Before we start, I do have some quick housekeeping. Please take a moment to read our code of conduct. We seek to provide a respectful environment for both our audience and presenters. While we absolutely encourage engagement in the chat, we ask that you please be mindful of your commentary, remain professional and on topic. Keep an eye on that chat. We'll be dropping links and checking for questions for our moderators to answer. Our session is being recorded. It will be available to view on demand right here on the Microsoft Reactor channel. With that, I'll turn it over to our speakers for today. Oren and Sonia, thank you so much for joining.
Hey viewers, my name's Oren Thomas, and today I'm joined by my colleague and friend, Sonia Cuff. And what are we talking about today, Sonia?
Hi everyone, we're going to talk about an AI Center of Excellence. So what exactly is that and why would you need one?
Well, the objectives and essentially what we'll talk about when we're going through and answering the question that Sonia's just posed is, what is the purpose of an AI Center of Excellence? How, once you've decided what the purpose of an AI Center of Excellence is, you'd actually tailor it to your organization's needs. How an AI Center of Excellence can drive adoption of successful AI projects. How an AI Center of Excellence can align your organization's AI initiatives with what your organizations consider to be its business values and the outcomes it's looking for. How an AI Center of Excellence provides operational oversight and can provide guidance on what workload best practices are, and how it might function as a sort of central place in your organization for skilling. So let's get into this first topic. So Sonia, what's an AI Center of Excellence?
It's a great question, Oren. And I think it's worth covering for people who are not familiar with the concept of a Center of Excellence as a thing. So bringing AI into your organization might be the first time you've actually had a need to pull together an initiative like this, or you might be a more established organization that already has centers of excellence for different types of workloads or different parts of your organization. But the cool part about a Center of Excellence for AI is it's really bringing together all of the knowledge and skills about AI in your organization, both the understanding of what AI is and how it's used and how it's configured, but also what that means to your organization. So it's not just generic stuff. You might be taking resources from outside places, but then looking at how that applies to your organization. at the end of the day, AI is another technology. And when we're making technology decisions, they should be based on the business goals that we have and making sure that we are getting a return on investment for those goals as well. So there's a really good part there in terms of business alignment. But it's also about making sure that the different people that are using AI inside your organization, or they're building AI workloads, or they're using off-the-shelf generative AI products, are sort of coming together. They're sharing the knowledge, they're doing things in a controlled manner, and you don't have random people going off doing different things inside your organization, especially as you get bigger. You might even not even realize that somebody in a certain department is using Gen AI for something, maybe with your business data or your customer data. So it's really important to connect all those different parts of the business together that are using AI. And then it gives us a way to have this structured, strategic approach to adopting AI, which technologies we're using and how we're implementing them.
And one of the things that this sort of approach is, where you've got a body within your organization that's sort of looking at, and in this case, it's because AI is a new technology, it's giving you an opportunity to sort of try and get out ahead of how you're looking at adopting this technology. And maybe just having you're all aware of, your grandmother's wisdom, where she said, measure a couple of times, measure twice, measure 3 times, cut once. That if you at least have a plan before you go in to adopt the technology, or before you go into anything, the plan might obviously change, but you're at least trying to approach it in a structured way. One of the big challenges that comes with any IT project and any project involving new technologies is trying to sort what the perception is of what you can do, or what the hype is about what you can do, with actually, let's set some structured, reasonable goals and outcomes that we can look at. So that if you've actually got an organization, or you've at least got a committee, or you've got people within your organization whose job is to think about, okay, and we'll talk about sort of all elements of this as we move through, but really looking at, okay, so AI is great, it's excellent, and we've all got someone in our organization that's come to us and said, oh, what's our AI plan? And you're going, well, figuring out what your AI plan involves figuring out what your business goals are, how you might use AI to accomplish those goals, and then how you might have a structured approach to those goals. And that's sort of what we're talking about in this session. So this next slide is asking us, what are the objectives of an AI COE? And to an extent, that's going to depend on your organization. We're giving you guidance on what this can be. You've got to make sure that if you choose to have this body within your organization which can really help you as a sort of central anchor point that people can come back to about best practices in all elements of AI adoption. But it's got to have a clear set of goals. You don't sort of want to set up a body where you don't know why it's there and you don't know what it does. What do you think, Sonia?
Yeah, I really like that. And I'm going to start by unpacking this adoption thing. Adoption is one of those aspects to technology that it's a little bit of a gray area. I think as technologists, we're very good at understanding how to take a piece of technology, configure it for our business use, deploy it, and get it into the hands of people. But the art and science of getting people in your business to actually use these technologies is a field of itself. There are actually adoption specialists for lots of other technologies, including our Microsoft 365 platform. The interesting thing about AI adoption is I think it enhances even more what we call the adoption curve of how ready people are to embrace an AI workload or not. So it's really magnified when you go and put a piece of technology into a business. When it's AI technology, you are absolutely going to have people inside your organization that are fired up and willing to go, and they're already using a chat GPT, and they really want this in their business tools, and they're keen as. you're also going to get people who are going to turn around and go, turn it off. I don't want it. I don't need an agent. Like, I just don't want AI in my workplace at all. They may have fears about what it's doing to the environment, or or whatever their concerns about, based on the information that they've given and how they're feeling about it. So it's actually super important to be able to have the Centre of Excellence to help smooth out that adoption curve and to sort of get people on the same page in terms of why are we doing this as a company, what are the security boundaries that we've put in place, how is it going to impact people's day. And I think the adoption part of that Centre of Excellence, it feels like one of the smallest parts when you start talking about all of the other things that a COE can cover. But I think it's actually super important, and it really is going to influence the success of these projects from the perspective of how they're viewed by the people in your organization that are actually using them.
One of the things, there's a bloke named Ethan Mollick who's just written a book called Co-Intelligence, and he's sort of one of the important voices. I think he's at one of the big US universities at the moment, and he writes a lot on, if you follow him on LinkedIn or follow him on your favorite social media platform, he's always bringing up studies about things like, especially AI adoption. And one of the things he talked about within his books is that what we're seeing at the moment with AI adoption is that rather than organizations sort of bringing in an AI technology and everybody in the organization doing it, what's happening a lot in organizations is that you're getting specific individual contributors who are finding a way to really scale themselves up and are doing it in a very idiosyncratic manner. So you have, throughout an organization, you'll have a couple of people who have suddenly become a lot more effective because they've figured out how to do their particular job with AI. Now, where an AI Centre of Excellence can help is if you can identify these people and say, look, your experiments are great. We want to make sure that they fit within our sort of our guidelines and our guardrails, and you're not leaking data off to wherever it's going. But you've clearly become a more effective employee. We're going to try and learn from what you have learned and then find a way to generalize that across the information. An AI Centre of Excellence part of its role would be to find those people in the organization who have become effective and then bring them to the attention of other people in the organization who might not have thought about it. And it might be, hey, Doris has figured out how to go and do this, and Doris is 10 times more effective. So let's get Doris on a meeting, bring her into a conference room, give her some biscuits, give her some coffee, and get her to tell you about what's going on. So think about it as in terms of that accelerating AI adoption, which is a very sort of paradigm, it's a very buzzwordy way of talking about it. But
yeah, and I think that kind of links into the Knowledge and Learning Hub component, right? Because at the end of the slide, we've got about the COE being as a hub for learning resources and training programs. That's a little bit more formal, and it can also be aimed at people who are less familiar with AI, and can also be a good basis for technology training and upskilling program in general, right? You don't just need to do this for AI quite a lot of the times. But I love that you introduced that champions sort of expertise sharing to get that out there, because that is another form of knowledge sharing. So that also really connects not only into adoption, but into that knowledge and learning hub.
And, to address one of the comments about AI hype, if you don't know what AI can do, because you're not again, with this adoption, we've got to go and adopt AI. And you've got certain type of people who have figured out, and they're people within your organization who have figured out how to do their job better. And that's the first step in this sort of adoption, is where people have figured out what problem they want to solve with it, rather than sort of having a body that meets there and goes, what problems can we solve with AI? And then trying to sort of whiteboard it out. There will be people that have figured this out, take their knowledge up and start using it. Now, the other part of an AI Centre of Excellence is this idea that it really is looking for consistent structure. So it's taking that knowledge that exists out on the ground level, on the shop floor, and going, okay, this is how they're doing it. Now, how can we make sure that what's being done in our organisation at the grassroots level can actually be done in a way that's compliant, that we can repeat it, that we're doing it in a reliable way, that it's not, just a workload that's so many points of failure that it couldn't be adopted by someone else because it's idiosyncratic. And then to make sure, and we'll come back to this idea of governance, because there's going to be regulation around this. There's going to be rules around this. There's going to be, you don't want, someone coming up to you from your legal department and going, well, you know how Doris was using AI? It turns out, ... that was actually fairly problematic. So
yeah, we talk about that for any workload, right? We talk about making sure that it is well structured and it's governed, and we do use this phrase that AI is just another workload. So we have to remember all of those principles that we apply to all the rest of our technologies.
So when we're talking about an AICOE's scope of activities, that's going to be extremely unique to the organisation. And if you go through the sort of the learn module and the learning path that we've put up there, and that there are also some additional documents that are available, we've got some white papers that are also available for you to read, which are much more at length sort of talking about these concepts. It's about things such as, we can see here on this slide, we're talking about hands-on technical execution. But it's technical execution that's about working out what the organization's needs are. And that's another part of that filtering process if you've got people that are already using AI and taking what they're doing, is the way that they're using AI aligned with what your organization's goals are? Or are they just wandering off in, if they're creating really nice pictures for PowerPoints, yes, that's the use of AI. Is it meeting your organization's needs? The other thing you can think about is, as a point of, someone is at least trying to think about, and this is the other element of it. You've got a body that's trying to answer these questions, rather than these questions being handled by individual workload teams or individual contributors. You've got a group of people that are trying to think about it and just distribute advice. Sonia?
Yeah, 100%. And I think the technical execution can also go down a layer into that technical depth, because there are a number of choices to be made when you're looking to architect AI workloads. So which AI technologies are you going to use? Are you going to train your own models or use them off the shelf? Like, again, there are all kinds of decisions that you are going to need to make, and you don't want individual teams making them differently. You don't want one AI service over here and a different structure over there. The more that you can sort of centralize the approach, you'd still need to tailor it to the specific use case inside your business that it's useful for. And there is an aspect to AI architecture about, choosing the right models for the right workloads. But you don't want to end up with this like potpourri of a whole bunch of different ways of implementing AI or using these AI architectures from a technical standpoint. So you need to bring in some consistency with that and say, like, this is the company standard, use this as a first preference. If this isn't going to work out for your specific business requirements, you're hitting a roadblock, you're not getting as good as a result, come and have a chat. Let's see if we need to make an exception or adjust things. But at least you've got that standard set and those lines of communication open from a technical standpoint.
So there is no one size fits all to an AICOE. As Sonia and I have been pointing out, it's really about figuring out what would work for your organization, but that because this is a new technology, because it's a new way of approaching doing things, that if at least there's a group of people that are sitting there thinking about it, that are collecting information and then disseminating that information. We've all been, if you work in a large enough organization, you see people in different teams that don't have communication with one another, solving the same problem, but using different methods to solve it. Even if there was a body, or at least everybody knew, hey, we've got this center of excellence, and all that center of excellence is every team sort of got a representative or something like that. So you can have a centralized model. Or you can think about it having execution bound in distributed teams. It's just an advice group. But where we're trying to go with why you would think about this particular approach is you are trying to take a structured knowledge sharing approach and a consistency approach to the adoption of AI workloads. But that you shouldn't ever sit there, and you've seen, if you've ever seen a 3-year-old with one of those sort of pushing your shapes into holes sort of a thing, and they've got a big hammer, sometimes, depending on the 3-year-olds, like sometimes you've got 3-year-olds that are very good at matching shapes, and the other ones that are like, you know what I'm going to do? We're making that shape go in no matter what. Make your COE work in the way that your organization works. You want to have people in your workload teams engage with the COE and share what they learned, because as much as the COE is going to be out there looking at external guidance and different people talking about how they've done AI in different and adopted it in different locations and looking at case studies, the real test of adoption is the outcomes, and those are going to be judged by the people in your organization. The people that you work with are going to try and sit there and go, has Doris, she's been working on this AI project, has what Doris has been doing over the last few months actually helped our organization, or has it just been Doris faffing about with a bunch of technologies?
Yeah, and I love that people might have come to this webinar to learn, learn about a centre of excellence and how to set it up. And our answer is it depends. It's a typical consulting answer, but it's so true. The slide at the moment that is showing about the different ways that you can structure this centre of excellence is going to absolutely depend on things like your organization size, how you're already structured, whether or not you've got any existing centers of excellence that you want to integrate this practice with or not. And so for a larger organization, you may absolutely be looking at having a specialist or two inside your IT division that are the AI experts. You might have headcount to make that a full-time FTE position, because it's so important to your org and your organization is big enough to warrant that. But for a lot of smaller organizations, they're not necessarily going to be able to dedicate headcount to be a COE person. And so that's where more of a decentralized model and a hybrid model can fit in, where you're actually taking people in existing roles, especially across IT in the business, and forming a V team with them to turn around and say, you are the people that need to be talking to each other about how we're doing AI in this business.
So one of the people in the sort of chats said, look, as you start to use AI, everybody's going to discover different things. And that's something that you have to sort of have as part of the flexibility of your model, that the intelligence that is learned is going bi-directionally, that it's centralized distribution of wisdom that is learned from here, but also that the group in the AICOE is responsible for looking outside in ways that maybe workload teams don't actually have the ability to do. But in defining the audience, you are working out, again, how your centre of excellence is going to operate. So figure out who your stakeholders are. And to a certain extent, yes, your stakeholders are organisational leadership, because they want to make sure that you're not going off, everybody is all going off in their own direction. I'm sure that you've seen that from the old Peanuts Christmas special, where they're all sort of playing their own instruments and everybody's going in their own direction. You don't want that sort of approach to technology adoption. You do want it to be everybody playing their instrument in a symphony, but everybody sort of adhering to appropriately the organizational tune. So determine who the audience of the COE are, which is, who are you, what's the COE there for? Why? Make sure that you're coming back to, and are we doing that? Are we learning from people, or are we just telling them how to do it? And if you're telling people how to do something that they've figured out how to do it better themselves, they're going to ignore you, because they're going to go, well, that person over in their ivory tower there is just telling us what they think. They haven't actually listened to what we have learned. So a big part of defining the audience is knowing who you're going to actually listen to, not only who you're going to speak to. And then you start small and you figure out how appropriate the size is. And don't be so prescriptive that people are afraid to innovate. Don't be the body that sits there and has so many guidelines that people aren't willing to experiment, because the reality is this is a brand new set of technologies and no one knows the best way to use these. And the way that we're going to find the best way to use these is sometimes people doing wacky experiments and it just turns out to be extraordinary. I mean, in my own case, I've created an AI avatar version of myself as a wacky experiment. It turns out it's actually made me a lot more productive. But if there'd been a set of rules about what I should use AI for and what I shouldn't use AI for, and I was just trying to follow the rules, I wouldn't have had that beautiful discovery of something that's ended up being quite useful.
Yeah, and I really like the last 2 points in terms of starting small. I think starting small also reflects the size of your centre of excellence, because if you put an email out to your organisation and says, who's interested in AI and wants to join the COE, like you're potentially going to get a number of people joining. So you kind of want to start out with a few people that you know and trust across the org in certain key roles and responsibilities to form this initiative and then to scale how it goes. And I'm going to push back a little bit on that oversight and innovation. I totally understand that sometimes, especially the IT department, gets a reputation for like being the no police. But I think the intention behind it, and from an organizational governance perspective that I know we'll cover a little bit later, some of these rules are in place for really good reasons, especially if you're in more highly regulated industries. So sometimes it is keep the level of oversight that you need. But I like your point about you don't need to go too far with it. It could be guardrails like what types of data are allowed to be used in third-party generative AI systems, for example. So you definitely do need to strike that balance between not locking everything down and saying people can't do experiments, but also show them a safe way to do it, maybe give them sample data that they could use, that kind of thing.
And another element of this is it's going to be each region of the world has its own business culture and how much they're willing to have innovation come from the grassroots up and how much the business culture is defined from the top down. So obviously the way that Sonia and I are talking about this is a very almost sort of Australian, New Zealand sort of very egalitarian way of sharing information in a business. We know that sort of our approach to this sort of inter-organizational communication where leadership is very, most of the time, quite receptive to ideas from, bubbling up from the bottom, might not be what works in some other cultures where it's sort of everybody waits for the person who's higher up the chain than them to actually, proclaim what they think, and then everybody sort of goes along with it. If you're in that sort of situation, maybe you've got to figure out how to do a COE in a slightly different way, because you've got to still find out a way to make sure that the person who is the one that everybody listens to is distributing information that will overall be helpful for the organisation.
Yeah. There's a question in the chat about what's the difference between a decentralized COE and a platform engineering team. And I think some of the things that we've talked about that a COE has responsibility for goes outside of the boundaries of what a normal platform engineering team would be responsible for. I don't see platform engineering teams being as interested in things like adoption, right? If the platform is structured well and it's running well, that's kind of where their cares stop. And also going back to what we talked about in terms of business alignment and return on investment, I think platform engineering teams do kind of feed some information into that conversation, but they're kind of less concerned about it, and that's sort of somebody else's decision or problem to worry about. Have you got any thoughts on that, Oren?
Well, I see I think, as you said fairly succinctly, the platform engineering team's there to make sure that the trains run on time and make sure all of the structure exists to run in the most efficient and appropriate way possible. And there will be things that the platform engineering team has learned. And when it comes to adopting new technologies, maybe they're looking for guidance, or maybe they've learned things that need to be distributed to other teams, or that information sharing. Remember that the COE is a guidance organisation, but also one that is maybe responsible for determining, and when we talk about things such as compliance, which we've got later on, it might be the COE's responsibility to determine what the compliance requirements are. It might be the platform or the workload team's responsibility to make sure that those things are actually met, but it might not be their role to actually understand, to comb through the legislation and figure out which particular security control or something like that. It might be that there's another group there that might be liaising with, your compliance team or your legal team that's sitting there going, okay, this new legislation's come in. We need to make sure that we meet these particular guidelines, figure out what the guidelines are, and then hand them across to the platform engineering team and say, right, we need it to be like this to be compliant. We've kind of worked out some ways that you can do it, and we'll be measuring it, but you need to implement it, so that we're going to be the ones, you're going to do it, and we're going to be scorecarding you based on what we actually need. So hopefully that's sort of addressed some degree of it, but that you would also want people from that platform engineering team that are interested in the topics that the COE is addressing to be either on the COE or certainly feeding a lot of information into the COE.
Yeah, 100%. And I think this next slide covers a few of those points that we've been talking about already in terms of the Centre of Excellence, establishing those standards and best practices for AI, providing oversight to ensure that what you're doing with AI does align with what the organisation needs, and that it is delivering a return on that investment. We've talked about project risks is an interesting one. I'm liking this one, mitigating project risks, scope creep and missed deadlines. Look, they are kind of inevitable in any project where you have technology and humans involved. And so it's very interesting to see the COE potentially playing a role in that, maybe in conjunction with your project managers who are actually doing that work themselves. But they can absolutely share some expertise and keep an eye on that and help guide the direction of the projects. The project scopes, defining the project scope, clear project scopes, realistic timelines and resources needed for success. Sounds like we're going to need a really good project manager on our COE, Oren.
With these mitigating project risks and defining project scope, there's a researcher at, I think it's called IT University of Copenhagen, a bloke named Bent Flyberg, who looks at specifically mega projects and cost overruns as his sort of very particular area of study. And one of the things that comes down all the time is the reason that IT projects are almost always run over budget is lack of proper scoping, and that sometimes you're working with a technology where what you predict the results are going to be are not necessarily what the results are going to be. So having a COE, one of the other elements of this is that if you've got a body where there's sort of an agreed upon scope and an agreed upon way of assessing timelines and resources, you can always, as a platform team or a workload team, go back if you're getting pressure from elsewhere and say, look, this is what we define the scope as. And we just don't want to turn around to whoever's higher up the chain and go, sorry, that's out of scope. But a COE will help you basically make that argument of, look, we're trying to deliver the project as originally envisioned. We do want to be receptive to what you're saying, but we also don't want to turn this into the project that never ends. And perhaps what you want to do, within the scope and the framework of where you're going, we need to keep this within particular boundaries. So that's another element of how a E might function. Now, we've got another question in the chat from Andrew. And what Andrew's saying is that, there's internal training to create some sort of COE. We're training together, but we've basically got some real fast movers and we've got stragglers. And how do you deal with that? Now, that's going to be a problem, not just for a COE. You're always going to have outlier employees that move insanely fast, and you're going to have other employees. And it's not necessarily, sometimes it's going to be the same person being in two different groups, depending on what the thing is. So it's not the properties of the person. There just can be that sometimes you have people who are hyper enthusiastic about something and dive so deeply into the rabbit hole that they get ahead. What you want to do is you want to make sure that you're not slowing those people down, because they're your pathfinders. They might be finding out things. Now, they might run like Wile E. Coyote off a cliff and get into some exciting things. But what you want to do is have them report back what they know, so that the rest of the people who are moving at a different pace are able to see what the road ahead looks like, because they're looking at that person that's moving, or that group of people that are moving fast, and they're saying, I see where the path is, because I'm seeing them as pathfinders, not that I'm seeing them as competitors and that I need to catch up to them. You work out what's going on, but use them as a group of, and understand that people are operating at different speeds, but that, within your COE, those people are moving quickly, but they might not be thinking about all of the other elements, like the governance element, the risk element, and all of that, because they're so excited about what they're playing with that they're not necessarily paying attention to everything around that. So within the frame of a COE, there's other elements that they might not be considering. So this is one of the things, is acknowledge that people do approach these things in different ways, and then work out how you can best take advantage of that for both groups, without any group feeling that they're not contributing at all. Like, that if you feel like you're a straggler, you're like, well, why am I here? I'm not doing anything useful. No, you are, because you're approaching it, hopefully, in a different way, where you might be considering elements that the other people aren't.
It's very much like being a school teacher. You think about a classroom full of kids, they don't all learn at the same pace. You're going to have children that find it harder to pick up concepts, and you're going to have people that race ahead because they are, more natural in terms of numeracy and literacy skills. And so while you've got one kid that will finish their work and then has the opportunity to pick up a book and will quite happily sit there and demolish half a book while the rest of the kids are still finishing their work, you do need to plan a little bit for how you give either extra encouragement, extra time, extra support to the people that are struggling. But at the end of the day, the people that are, not learning as quickly or not picking up this stuff as quickly, you're going to have a different baseline for them in terms of your expectations of what they achieve. Like, if they get to the point where they can understand the concept and finish the work on time, that's good enough. So you just have to accept that different people are going to be at different stages of how fast they learn to set that bar for what is kind of the minimum level that you need to get people to. But also, as you said, don't restrict and let other people extend those skills.
So on this slide, we're looking at how an AI COE can minimize failure rates. And that's really coming back to that measure twice, cut once philosophy that, we've learned our entire life. Some extent of identifying potential pitfalls is just talking about what you're going to do before you go and do it. And maybe someone will see where there's an obvious pitfall. Sometimes it'll be that someone encounters a problem, and by communicating with the COE, you can go, right, now, is this a problem that's one of those existential level problems that means that the entire project is at risk? Because sometimes when we encounter those, people keep trying to soldier through and get it done. And maybe the COE's going, actually, you know what we've hit there? We've hit something that means that this project is not going to work unless we're going to put so much resources into it that we're never going to get a return on investment. I mean, if you go and throw enough, the theory is, if you throw enough money at anything, you can solve the problem. That isn't always true. Sometimes all you're doing, the only problem you're solving is how can we reduce the amount of money that we've got in our operating budget. The other thing,
I think this is especially important for AI projects because we do have this two sides of the coin of it's just another workload, but it also is a new type of workload. So one of the things that we talked about in terms of like project management was timelines. And timelines is one of those things going to absolutely destroy a new project. But the challenge with these AI technologies and how we're implementing them is we don't know what we don't know. So we're kind of figuring this out as we go along. We might not be sure that we've got exactly the right model or that, we're still trying to figure out some of the intricacies of this AI stuff as it applies. Like how much is it going to cost my organization when this is up and running and I've got all of my staff using it? Like those are big kind of questions that we kind of figure out as we go along as well. So I think that's really important that the Centre of Excellence is integrated with these projects as well. So as we've said, they can take the lessons learned from one AI project and see the signals in a different project or apply the learnings to a different project.
The other thing that's sort of on this slide is this idea of a realistic goal assessment. And when we're talking about a technology like AI, we're really stuck in a particular place where sometimes we've watched too much Star Trek and we think it might do stuff it can't do. And sometimes we underestimate what it can do. So one of the things with a realistic goal assessment is that when someone comes in and says, look, I've got this project that I want to run in the organisation, and maybe comes to the COE, and the COE sits there and reviews projects as they're proposed and just sort of does a sanity check on the project. Now, you'd want to have people who understand AI well enough to know whether or not the sanity check's reasonable or not. But you see projects all the time where someone assumes that AI can do something that it can't do. Now, sometimes that's good, and then sometimes it's bad because sometimes they push, you want to figure out how innovative does your organisation want to be, but are there models of where this has been done before? Are you completely breaking new ground? And then the COE can go, you know what? I've heard of someone else doing that. The project that's most likely to come in on budget is one that's been done before by someone where you've got a realistic set of goals and you've got a realistic, and you know how to achieve those goals. If you're not sure how to achieve the goals because you think that AI is magic, pixie dust, then you have a chance of actually going way off track. And the other element is the early intervention benefits. The AI COE can sit there and go, look, we don't want to keep going down this track because we don't think it's going to pay off for our business. And that's really important because you might have the best project in the world, but if it's not actually paying off for where your leadership wants to go and the outcomes that they're looking for, it's not sort of like where you're going to pivot the whole business to where your project's going to go, unless you're a small organization. You want to make sure that the projects that are being spun up in your organization do have that sanity check against how do we make sure that this is aligned with what the business's goals are, and that an AI COE can sit there as a layer between sort of the upper strategic layer of, well, this is where we want to go, and then taking those project ideas that might be bubbling up from below and then bringing them to the appropriate decision makers and saying, look, Doris has said that she can actually do this project that's going to achieve this outcome. And that at a certain point in time, someone has to decide whether or not to allow Doris to go off and do that and allocate resources to Doris's project. And that sometimes a COE can sit there and understand what projects are coming up, but it might be the layer that's the organizational management layer is the one that says, you know what, this particular project that Doris is working on will actually really, really help our business. So let's prioritize giving resources to what Doris is working on. Let's give her a team and let's see if we can really turn this into something that may actually fundamentally change our business. Or it might just be a couple of percent, but that's useful. But making sure that the projects aren't, and we've always got to be careful with this in technology. You're not doing the project because it's cool. Cool helps. You're doing the project because it's going to actually achieve an outcome that's good for the organisation you work for.
Yeah, 100%. And we use the phrase, just because you could doesn't mean you should have stopped and figured out whether you should or not, right? There's a lot of things that we can do with AI, and some of them are cooler than others, but whether or not we should be doing it in our organization, whether or not it's the first thing we should be doing, or we for other things we should be focusing on. There's a great, there's a book that is referenced quite often inside IT circles called the Phoenix Project, and it talks about computer systems from the perspective of a factory floor. And if you've got a broken machine in one part of your process, that's probably the place where you should start, because anything else you do on that factory floor, if you go and upgrade some of your machines and make them bigger and faster and more throughput, you've still got a broken machine on the floor that is impacting the pipeline of the work of your factory. And so taking these amazing creative ideas, sometimes reining in at those people that want to run a bit faster with the AI technologies, and actually aligning it to, what does my factory floor look like as a business? Am I pointing these tools in the direction of my most pressing business problem? And it might not necessarily be the most pressing business problem, because that one might be really complicated to solve, and AI may only be a small component of that. So it's about having that conversation. Maybe it's scoping it down to the next problem where you think that AI does have a better chance of improving things.
Another element of the AICOE is the idea that when a project is successful, or even measuring the success of a project by having a body outside the workload team. Like, we've all worked in organizations where a particular team's done a particular thing and then emailed everybody in the organization to go, look at how much impact we're having, right? Because of course the team that's working on that is actually going to go and claim that. If you've got what's considered a fairly independent body within your organization that's looking at all of the projects that are running, when they're claiming that impact, when they claim that a project has got impacted, they're basically putting their reputation on the line with the rest of the organisation. Because if they declare a project impactful that's really wasting everybody's time, they're just going to look like they're not really got their eyes on the ball. So what an AICOE can do is come up with what success metrics look like. That helps the workload teams, because then they've got something that they know by accomplishing is aligning with what the organisation's objectives are. So the COEs almost function sort of as an abstraction layer there to make sure that the success metrics for projects that are communicated down to workload teams and people that are working with these new projects are success metrics that are actually important to the people above. Because when you define your own success metrics, they might be good metrics, but they might not be convincing to the people that are actually paying the bills at your particular organisation.
Yeah, and I just want to unpack that a little, because when we think of metrics as technologists, we tend to think of hard and fast numbers, right? Sometimes it's easy to have hard and fast numbers and turn around and say, this process used to take X amount of time, now it takes a third of that or a quarter of that because we've got AI doing some of the lifting. Productivity is a harder one to put some hard and fast metrics on in terms of the time it's taking people to do their jobs. But there's somebody here at Microsoft that uses a story about, on a normal day, he would be logging off around about 6 p.m., sometimes after 6 p.m. after he's done his normal daily work. And sometimes, getting yelled at by his family about why isn't he helping out with dinner. And since integrating AI more into his workflow, he's actually now always 100% in the kitchen helping out by 6 p.m. And it's not a hard and fast metric, but he can actually see the value of that productivity and enhancement and knows that that's directly related to the use of AI. So sometimes you have to dig around and find some of those softer stories if you're not going to have hard and fast tangible metrics. The hard and fast metrics are always preferable, but don't discount some of the other benefits of these AI projects and how you can sort of capture those success stories.
So one of the other things that we've talked about is this idea of a COE sort of being a body that sort of stores and disseminates best practices. And that's really just as a set of guideposts for workload teams or teams that are working on AI projects to make sure that when they're spinning up these projects, even at the conceptual stage, they're thinking about what the appropriate things that they need to keep in mind. Like, we want to make sure before you spin up this project that anything that you spin up is going to be reliable and secure. We all know in IT operations that there are many projects that started as experiments that have ended up as production workloads. And because they started as experiments, they didn't architect in all of the elements that would make them great production workloads. And it's easier to make sure you've got that going from the beginning rather than rebuilding the steam train as it's rocketing down the track and you've kept putting carriages on the end of it. So making sure that your AI workload is reliable and secure. And the third session of this, we're going to talk about architectural guidance. And in the second session, the one that we're doing next week, we'll actually be talking about, how the AI Centre of Excellence can really help with different elements such as monitoring and really going into much more detail and working with workload teams on the operational aspects of AI workloads, but also making sure that compliance and ethical governance ideas and standards and guardrails are built in from the beginning, and that you've got a standard set of practices that once you're working out what works, that you're disseminating those practices across the organization so everybody can see what's worked, but everybody can also figure out, because you will report not only your successes but your failures, that if a team sort of ends up going down a path that ends up being entirely unproductive, everybody knows, okay, don't go and try that, because all you're going to do is waste a couple of weeks on something that's not going to go anywhere.
Yeah, that compliance and ethical governance is something that I think is more prevalent with AI workloads. We don't put out guidance in our organizations about what you should use PowerPoint for and what kind of PowerPoints you shouldn't be creating. Like, this is not the kind of content that we want you creating a slide deck about. But there are those responsible AI boundaries around how we're using AI and what we're using it for in our organizations. So we may have access to a tool that can do a bunch of different things, but should we be using AI to make recommendations on bonuses or do performance ratings on our employees, that kind of thing? These tools probably can, with all the other things that they can do, but that's where we might want to start drawing some ethical boundaries of don't use it for this. And that, I don't think we've come across that really with any other kind of technology project, but it's something we certainly have to think about now as part of our organizational governance for AI.
And with a Centre of Excellence, the Centre of Excellence can really look into and work with the appropriate people within your organisation and external to them about working out what your governance frameworks look like and how they must look like from a regulatory reason. Because the last thing you want is sort of auditors from the government coming in and wanting to have a chat with someone at your organisation, so that you can figure out what the rules are. And the other thing is you need to keep an eye on this, because as this technology is fast moving, the legislation is usually slower moving than the technology, but the legislation is always on the move as well. It's not, and sometimes they're trying to apply rules that might have been written 50 years ago. And we see this with cloud security standards, where interestingly, if you're looking at cloud security standards, a lot of the rules that used to exist were actually developed as information security standards in the 70s. We're getting a bit better with those, but there are some of those rules that have been written a very long time ago that we're trying to find ways to apply to technologies that were invented 5 minutes ago. So the AICOE, generally governance is not something that, it's something that the people that run the workloads have to worry about, but that they're not thinking about in terms of what actually applies. They just want to know what the controls are and their assessment of the workload against the controls. Like, which is your policy would I turn on to determine whether or not I'm compliant with that particular regulation? That's fine, but you've got to know which regulations that you've got to be compliant to know what you need to turn on. So the AICOE can really help in making sure that it's looking outside the organisation so that the things that are inside the organisation are actually compliant with what needs to go on. Now, the COE can also basically say, look, we need a systematized approach to how we're doing the costs for this AI workload.
Yeah, absolutely. So as I've said a couple of times, on one hand, AI is just another workload. It's going to have an underlying application architecture and associated costs for infrastructure and services. But there are some AI specifics that you need to wrap your head around, things like token usage and how tokens are charged. So there's a few new things that pop in there. And then how are we optimizing that application to optimize that token usage, which then optimizes the costs? So from a general cost management and optimization perspective, there's some great guidance from the FinOps Foundation with the FinOps framework that sets up best practices and different capabilities for managing costs across both cloud and SaaS solutions. And AI is one component that we're drilling down to even deeper with FinOps in terms of which of those still apply and what things are you going to need to add on for your AI workload. But this monitoring in a different kind of way, the equating the ongoing cost back to the performance of your AI workloads and how they are optimized. And then again, whether or not you're getting a return on that investment is all super, super important. And it's a case of figuring out what are the practices that we have already in place that we need to click into and where do we need to go deeper with some AI specifics. And if you don't have a FinOps practice inside your organization, these AI workloads can be a nice sort of kicker to get you kickstarted in that direction, because then you can put some processes in place that you can then extend across your cloud workloads as well.
So we're just about near the end. And one of the things that we sort of want to come back to is how an AICOE can also drive a set of consistent organization-wide resources about how to use AI in your particular organization. So that is, after each project's done, really coming up with a way of making sure that everybody in the organization knows what the project was. And maybe it's an ongoing project. Maybe someone's created an application that can be used, that uses generative AI or uses AI in some way. And that the COE can then make sure that the systems exist within the organization to train other people in the organization how to go and use that. We've all seen in organizations we've worked for where one team's gone and built a really good tool that could be used for the organization, but no one's actually been told about it or trained how to use it. And that means that the organizational outcome's not that great. It might be the best tool in the world, but unless people know how to use it, it's not going to work. So think of this, the AICOE also being about, okay, not only have we provided oversight and learning about all the way that AI is being used within the company so that we can disseminate that, we can also make it so that everybody in the organization has a repository so that they can learn how to use the tools that we've built. And that you've got people that are using the tools and building the tools and making sure the tools are architected and reliable and secure and well governed. That's all one thing. And then you've got the tool using people in your organization that you've built it for, and really getting their feedback and being able to feed that back to the workload teams as appropriate, or share it with one another so that the most effective tool users then are sharing their experience with using these sort of tools.
Yeah, and even inside Microsoft, we're encouraged to do that, to share with one another, you know, the benefits that we're seeing of using AI in our day-to-day work. And that knowledge sharing means that somebody else can go, I hadn't thought of that. That might not exactly apply to me, but maybe I could tweak it this way and it would be relevant. So it's a concept called working out loud that we talk about quite a lot in adoption, that's really good at sort of cross-populating that knowledge and inspiring others.
Anyway, so today we talked about the purpose of an AI Centre of Excellence, how you could tailor an AI Centre of Excellence to your organisation's needs, how an AI Centre of Excellence can help you drive adoption of successful AI projects, how an AI Centre of Excellence helps your organisation align AI initiatives, making sure that they actually achieve business outcomes and value that are relevant to your organisation, how an AI Centre of Excellence can basically sit there and serve as a way of driving or being operational oversight and making sure that best practices are developed and followed throughout your organisation. And then also how the AI Centre of Excellence can function as a central hub for training people, not only to implement all of these best practices, but to use the AI tools that are developed in your organisation in the most effective way possible.
Absolutely. And I'm really excited about the next session that we've got coming up, because we're going to dive more into how you set up a centre of excellence and get into the next level of detail beyond the why you should do it and what you can do with it.
And how that centre of excellence can provide useful, direct information to your workload teams about things like how do we decide what metrics are appropriate? How do we decide what architecture? How do we decide what processes are the best for us to use when it comes to deploying and running AI workloads? Thank you very much for your attention. I've been Oren Thomas.
And I've been Sonia Cuff. Thanks for joining.
Have a wonderful day.